Computer on.
Computer on.
Start file.
Start file. Hollywood and anime. Run program.
I am a living, thinking entity who was created in the sea of information.
It's gigantic!
Start talking!
Anime, drawing a revolution.
Anime. Japanese animation, often characterized by highly stylized art and adult themes.
American audiences have been enjoying anime for decades. They just didn't know it. Western fans were hooked on the unique storytelling style of this Japanese cinematic art form.
I was probably drawn in mostly by the characters. Really wanted to know what happened next.
Anime was a sophisticated and economical way to tell epic stories.
They were doing cartoons like it's full-length features. They were just much more in touch with impacting the audience in an emotional way.
As anime grew up, so did its fans.
I always liked it because it seemed a lot edgier than American animation. American animation always seemed safe and boring. And the Japanese stuff always seemed psychotic.
These fans are the filmmakers that populate Hollywood today.
As a filmmaker, anime started to inform a lot of the way action was being handled, and I would see a lot of correlation between what was happening in Japanese animation and what was showing up in movies.
What drew them to anime began to filter into the Hollywood properties they created.
Ghost in the Shell was made as an anime film, and the Wachowski brothers saw it, and it really inspired their Matrix.
Anime is influencing a generation.
Anime is so deep into the culture now. It's so completely intermixed with our sense of visual storytelling that it can never be separated.
Hollywood is embracing the anime revolution.
Case study. Transformers.
Autobots, transform!
Transformers began as a successful Japanese toy line. The transforming robots inspired a popular Marvel comic book series and a Saturday morning cartoon show in 1984. Its American toy distributor, Hasbro, created the animated Saturday morning series as a way to promote the toys. The show was produced in the US and drawn in Japan. Its television debut marks the start of a generation fully embracing the anime storytelling style. Transformers goes on to inspire the creation of an American entertainment dynasty. 20 years later, the children who fostered the franchise are now Hollywood executives. Their enthusiasm sparked the creation of the first Transformers live-action feature. The movie has set new box office records.
Manga. Japanese comic books or graphic novels, characterized by highly stylized art.
If you're going to talk about anime, you have to look at manga first.
Manga is widely read in Japan by children and adults. The stories cover subjects that range from action-adventure, science fiction and fantasy, to romance, horror, sports, and pornography. Manga is growing in popularity worldwide and represents a market of almost $5 billion a year. The stories that are successful as manga are often translated into anime. Contemporary manga originates just after the Second World War in a post-apocalyptic Japan. Artists found a new freedom of expression as the country was rebuilt. Western culture, in the form of film, art, and literature, became more commonplace and influential. One artist emerged to shape the storytelling style of manga. His distinct approach became the inspiration for modern anime.
Osamu Tezuka has been referred to as the Disney of Japan, and rightfully so, I would say. Tezuka could do it all. Virtually every genre of Japanese comics could be said to have been invented by him.
Tezuka was a very wealthy kid. I mean, he grew up in Osaka, so he had access to these old Disney reels. Tezuka claimed to have seen Bambi 80 times, sitting in the theater, in the dark theater with his sketchbook, copying Bambi. But his vision was to take a Japanese aesthetic and combine it with Disney's brilliantly cinematic style of storytelling.
Osamu Tezuka created a world uniquely his own, with a filmic shorthand that exploded the stillness of manga's black and white graphic universe.
A lot of the camera angles and the pacing and the way he would tell stories that lasted hundreds of pages was like using the panels of the comic like frames in a film.
But he also blended a lot of different influences from, Tex Avery and Looney Tunes and Mickey Mouse.
He was just incredibly protean. I mean, he would make manga about Nazi Germany. He would make manga based on Dostoevsky. And then he would create his own characters such as Astro Boy or Mighty Atom. And then he went out and sold his own books to commuters, people heading back to work in a pretty much decimated Tokyo.
Tezuka's manga captured the imagination of a shell-shocked audience hungry for meaning in post-apocalyptic Japan.
His great influence was the war. Manga was an underground expression of post-World War II Japanese trauma.
Tezuka's love of American animation and the popularity of his manga stories inspired his decision to make them move. Astro Boy became the first domestically produced animated series on Japanese television.
There you go, Astro Boy, on your flight into space.
Tezuka's anime style, I think, funneled a lot of different styles from America, put them all into a blender, mixed with his own dark, tragic themes, and then spit it back out in a way that I think was very accessible to kids, but also spoke to adults.
My son. My son.
So you've completed it after all. This may mean trouble.
I'm taking him with me. I'll bring him up as my son. You can do whatever you like, but you're not taking my son away from me.
You really can trace just about everything back to this one guy. Everybody who came after, all are kind of in the shadow of Tezuka Sensei.
Astro Boy's success marks the start of the anime craze in Japan. The rest of the world, including Hollywood, would soon follow.
Case study. Sin City.
The popularity of manga wasn't limited to fans in Japan. Sin City creator and co-director Frank Miller is an acknowledged manga enthusiast. His illustration technique and storytelling style has borrowed from the cinematic approach that Tezuka pioneered. He embraced manga and anime's obsession with darker themes, characters, and stories that transformed the American comic book industry.
Oh, sugar. You just gone and done the dumbest thing in your whole life.
Miller's distinctive technique was irresistible to film director Robert Rodriguez, who was exploring the next generation of CGI storytelling for the big screen. Their experiment, translating Miller's Sin City manga-influenced property into a live-action feature, resulted in a critical and financial success that made Hollywood sit up and take notice.
Muramasa, go get me a fucking tank!
Japanese animation is kind of unique because it's embracing this relatively obsolete 2D media, which is still a hand-drawn, very natural pencil on paper, and it's still a very close to their heart art medium.
Anime draws on both Eastern and Western illustration traditions.
Line is very important in Japanese traditional woodblock prints. Line is very important in hokusai artwork. And so when you have an anime character, you have the line first instead of the shading. You have the large eyes, which in Japan are expressive of sensitivity. The large-eyed characters are the ones who are sensitive and good-hearted and kind, and the squinty-eyed characters are the characters you can't trust.
Even the way the Japanese draw figures is a little bit different. The proportions, The head in relation to the body might be a little different proportion, the way they move, and you can usually tell something that's a Japanese cartoon from an American one.
It's a little more realistic, I guess. Maybe the body structures, the muscle structures, a little more human looking, like the way the characters move, the way the hair flows, the way the eyes blink, everything. I think that they're like really trying to capture real life movements. Then there's some of the cartoons where, you know, when a character gets excited, you know, like his head grows twice the size and like the eyes get all big and blinky and like just really sort of over the top cartoony stuff.
What are you talking about?
The Japanese film industry is relatively small and has not been able to support the creation of pricey live-action feature films. As a result, anime has filled the gap, borrowing Hollywood cinematic tricks and techniques to tell epic Japanese stories for a fraction of the cost. These innovative adaptations bring a fresh energy and dramatic vitality to anime's mostly 2D universe.
The thing that really blew me away was just like how much more technical and complicated the animation was in anime than just your normal like Disney cartoon.
The detail in the entire frame is amazing. The colors are so much more muted, and it really looks like a painting to me, much more than typical animation that I would see in the States.
The way they go from scene to scene, and the way they shoot the scenes, and the angle, long shot, close up, looking down, fade in, fade out.
The creators and the illustrators are doing cartoons like it's full-length features, holding moments that a director would give an actor in a close-up.
How much is this?
They were just much more, I believe, in touch with like impacting the audience in an emotional way.
Anime appeals to a wide audience. Its stories range from martial arts to sports, animal stories, children's stories, romance, science fiction, and horror films. It's similar to the genres we see in Hollywood's live-action films, but they're animated.
Theme-wise and story-wise, the kind of American animation is definitely geared towards kids usually. But when I see Japanese animation, some of the storylines are so complex that it would go right over a kid's head. I think they're meant to be made as just like a movie, you know, that's like an adult action science fiction movie or whatever it is, but it's just animated.
Anime is willing to explore adult themes that often challenge the sensibilities of Western audiences.
They tend to go to a little bit of a darker feel to it, but a little bit more abstract in some ways. Mostly, to me, it's the way they treat the characters and the epic nature of many of these stories.
Run. You gotta hurry.
When I was growing up, I really watched a lot of Battle of the Planets, and I think what struck me was their sincerity towards dramatic action. And I was watching these shows and going, brothers are dying, and people are crying, and planets are exploding.
The stuff these characters go through is off the charts. If you look at Ghost in the Shell, for example, in the scene where she's pulling the roof off the tank and her arms are splitting open and the muscle fibers and the steel are just splitting, and the total disregard and disconnection for her own being at that point. There's an intensity to that. When you watch it, it's way more visceral and attractive as a victory and as a hero story than you'll get from anything else. That's why I think we're drawn into it.
They tend to be more multi-layered stories. The heroes won't be quite as pristine. They'll be a little flawed.
Don't you get it? I'm gonna splatter Grandma!
Well, that's a real shame. But we're not cops, and we're not from some charity organization. Sorry, lady, but we don't protect or serve. This is strictly business.
What?
Guess you'll just have to chalk it up to bad luck.
There's an honesty to it, which I appreciate, and then there's a perverseness that sometimes I don't. they go so far over the edge with things like La Blue Girl, where the sexual nature of the cartoon just goes off the deep end, where women are raped by demons, and you're like, dude, dial it back a little. You had me at strangled.
And that's just the beginning. She's tiny, but she's got bigger breasts than me. I mean, look at these things. They're immense. This is another important aspect of Moe.
Indeed.
Sexuality in Japanese society doesn't have the puritanical influences that tend to limit the filmmakers in Hollywood. Sex and pornography in anime for grown-ups is commonplace.
You want to feel them for yourself?
Hentai is acceptable to a certain degree because it's something that people see as it's animation. It's not live action, it's just something that someone has drawn.
The idea of pornography going past sort of what we would consider normal pornography or even kinky pornography into tentacle pornography, I think many people cite the old woodblock cut called The Fisherman's Wife, which is this very sort of randy piece of artwork with a fisherman's wife being pleasured by an octopus. That notion is still alive and well in today's creation.
Wow! What did you do that for? Ah.
That's the viewing fee. Quite a bargain, nicht?
It's overpriced, but that's all right. Here's your change.
Anime is still today not mainstream, and that's why I think it can be so free and so edgy. It's still underground, it's still off the radar a bit.
Sister, you mind if I ask you one question?
What is it?
When you're full prosthetic, can you have sex?
You care to find out?
Another time.
Sexy cyborgs are a familiar character in Japanese anime. Their origins can be found in the robots popularized in Japanese manga.
There is an old comic book clip that I've seen from World War II era of a giant robot with a lance laying waste to New York City. This was sort of a power trip of Japan, hoping that this technology was going to save them. That idea of the giant robot, the idea of this fantastic power that is mechanically built but sort of humanoid in nature, has been there since then. The original giant robot that I can think of is Tetsujin 28-go, otherwise known as Gigantor. And he was the first big robot. And Gigantor was originally built as a secret weapon against the Allied forces during World War II. This, of course, was cut out of the American version of the anime when it was brought over.
Say, what would we ever do without that thing? That's one thing I hope we never find out, Inspector.
This idea of this giant robot, which then turned into almost a divine robot. Voltron, all of these giant robots suddenly have this almost spiritual notion to them. For me, that goes back to the notion of kami, this notion of the guardian spirit that looks over a part of Japan and defends it.
The popularity of robots helped to create an entire genre with classic anime series like Voltron, Robotech, and Gundam. Over time, Hollywood has responded with blockbusters like War of the Worlds, Blade Runner, and Star Wars. The use of robots in anime also reflected a greater sophistication in the art form. American animation had a very different approach.
Animation in America had its roots in sort of vaudeville and slapstick. It was sort of aimed for a younger audience. That was not the case in Japan. There was a freedom of storytelling which allowed a level of maturity and emotional danger.
My body's not doing what I tell it to. My power's acting on its own. Golly! Ah!
Anime's post-apocalyptic roots have inspired a storytelling style that sets it apart from its animation cousins to the West. Inspiration comes in many forms. Renowned Japanese filmmaker Hayao Miyazaki uses anime to tell stories that appeal to audiences of all ages. Miyazaki describes his films as feature theatrical animation. His unique approach can be seen in all of his films, but the most striking examples can be seen in Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, and Howl's Moving Castle.
He aims higher with what he's trying to do. The stories, again, don't condescend to children. He's created an art form and made people realize that these are great films, not just great animation, but great films.
You can really go down the wrong road with anime and thinking that, you know, well, it's just crazy and it's off the wall. But it's not the case. There's got to be some sort of heart to it. There's got to be some sort of core, and I think Miyazaki does that really well.
Howl's Moving Castle shows Miyazaki's distinct animation style. His skillfully detailed characters and environments lend a breathtaking complexity that continually delights audiences. Princess Mononoke shows Miyazaki's wonderful grasp of character. His films often revolve around the adventures of remarkable human females, magical animals, and spirits that bond on an extraordinary quest. Spirited Away demonstrates Miyazaki's common theme of individual empowerment and how it can be a tool for the greater good.
I think Spirited Away was very much like an Alice in Wonderland. This intellectual kind of, you know, commentary that's undertoned, it really gets me. You can entertain a kid, because the kid's like bugged out by all of this wonderful imagery, but for an adult, like, makes you think.
It's so easy to say, you know, Miyazaki and Spirited Away, but I mean, just how crazy and whimsical that world is, but it's still just so grounded because you just sort of feel for this girl who's trapped in this other world, and it all comes back to, you know, what she's longing for and what she needs and how she needs to get out of there.
Miyazaki's animated films have been an inspiration for his Eastern and Western contemporaries.
John Lasseter turned me on to Spirited Away because I was talking to him whether 2D animation was dead or not. He says 2D animation is not dead. If you tell a good story, it doesn't matter.
They continue to enthrall audiences and inspire filmmakers the world over.
Case study 300.
The box office success of another Frank Miller adaptation, 300, served to further whet Hollywood's appetite for bringing manga, anime, and graphic novels to the big screen. .300 was almost a frame-for-frame adaptation of the visceral feast Miller had created on the printed page. Director Zack Snyder took existing CGI techniques to a new level, shooting the international cast on a green-screened soundstage, allowing him to fully realize the spectacular action of Miller's award-winning graphic novel. American television changed anime from an obscure Japanese art form into a beloved entertainment phenomenon. In the early 60s, TV in the US was rife with animation that featured the slapstick comedy of talking animals and overblown human caricatures. Viewers were ready for something new.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, 100,000 robots assembled in the Great Plaza below have just heard the joyous news that they are free. The Robot Bill of Rights, signed this morning, now prohibits the purchase...
It's a trick by the Institute of Science. No, not trick by the Institute of Science. This is a decision that was reached by all mankind.
I'm not giving Astro Boy back. I bought him for a lot of money.
If you don't release the boy, you'll be guilty of a crime not against me, but against humanity.
Astro Boy was actually tried out on NBC, so people did get to see it, but it was very much a sort of underground, eccentric cartoon. And Astro Boy really is, compared to Mickey Mouse, much more complicated. The character is half robot, half human. You're never quite sure which part is acting out. Mickey's a mouse, right? So... Astro Boy never really took off, but in the 70s, Battle of the Planets and Speed Racer, as we know them in America, were the two signal series that reached legions of American kids after school who didn't even know necessarily that they were from Japan.
Here comes Speed Racer, he's a demon on wheels. He's a demon and he's gonna be chasing after someone.
I grew up watching the local UHF channels, and they showed a lot of Speed Racer. Those cartoons really attracted me because they were so different than the American cartoons.
What about you being in the race?
Oh.
Why not enter at Speed? I'm sure you're the only one who could beat the masked racer.
Maybe I am, but maybe I'm not.
The style of Speed Racer was quite different from the animation that we were used to. The Tom and Jerry cartoons, the Disney, even the Popeyes. The characters were more realistic, and there was a warm relationship, not a saccharine relationship, between the characters. That was different.
Who's that?
Unknown to Speed, this is his older brother Rex, who ran away from home years ago.
I always wanted to be Speed Racer, and I always thought my brother was Racer X. The fact that that show happened to take that brotherly love type of story, because Racer X was always trying to protect Speed, but never admitting that is his brother. And Speed was always going, I wonder who Racer X is. And the audience is going, it's your brother, he's trying to save you. Anime is very personal. You know, the kind of stories that are told, American animation, it kind of always looks to me like it's on a stage, kind of far away from you. And Japanese animation always makes me feel like I'm really, really close, that I'm really inside a character's head.
American cartoons were like, you know, talking dogs or, but even the action was a little bit softer. With these cartoons I was watching from Japan, the action was a little tougher, so it seemed more serious to me.
It was like a guilty pleasure as for a 10-year-old. It's like, wow, these people are really driving off the sides of cliffs. Can you show that on TV?
By the mid-70s, U.S. audiences had embraced the anime imports as their own. One of the factors that helped to foster that enthusiasm was a small science fiction movie that became one of the most influential blockbusters in history.
Star Wars comes out, suddenly everyone's scrambling for some kind of outer space-based story that contains, you know, battling factions. Sandy Frank was a producer at NBC. He had seen an early version of Battle of the Planets, loved it, and he says, I got it. There's a story from Japan. It's called Gatchaman, that's the Japanese name.
Goodbye, G-Force and your whirlwind pyramid.
I noticed that these were shows that had action like I played with my action figures. You know, it was sort of like when you're a kid, they're constantly putting their heads down and getting into that world. Like they want to totally immerse themselves in the world of the characters that they're playing with. And anime sort of has this way of doing that, and I think that sort of really struck a chord with me, especially with Battle of the Planets.
That sense of unironic drama in the animated medium is a powerful idea that only Japan at least does to the fullest.
There are storylines in which characters die or commit horribly violent acts. So what they do is they bring in the Deus Ex Machina. They call him 7-Zark-7, and he's a quite clearly R2-D2 clone, and then says, don't worry kids, everything's all right. You know, he'll come back next week. See you again, have a great time, you know. And that's how the shows ended.
In 24 hours, they'll resume their normal shapes and be ready for their next assignment. And I'll always be here to coordinate and keep a watchful eye on them. I don't know why I worry about G-Force so much, but I guess even a little robot is human enough to love his family.
Case study: Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, heroes in a half-shell, turtle power.
Anime was re-educating its Western cartoon audience. The time was right for an unusual breakout hit. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles featured 4 talking turtle warriors who fought crime. Their choice of weaponry and fighting philosophy was decidedly Japanese. The Turtles' success marked a defining moment for American audiences and Hollywood, as consumers opened their hearts and wallets to the reptilian mutant crime fighters. After years of success on television, in merchandising, video games, several live-action films, and most recently another hit television series, Hollywood has come knocking. This time it's leveraging the advances of CGI in the feature world.
What are they gonna do now? Why don't you suck on some of this?
He's dead. I made some adjustments to the steam tanks.
the animated image in primetime television in the United States really helped open the door to Japanese animation coming over.
In the 90s, some of anime's most beloved films were released in the States, but audiences were small and largely unresponsive.
I think the mid-90s was kind of a dark time for Japanese animation in the adult sense. Ghost in the Shell 1 had a very modest theatrical release with a very passionate small following. Akira was released, but nothing was really hitting big.
Anime's appeal couldn't be ignored for long. Positive word of mouth and critical acclaim started to penetrate America's avant-garde, filtering up to mainstream creatives in film and television.
But Akira, of course, was a big influence. You know, I thought that was brilliant, especially when it came out. Staggering what it did in terms of just everything, how it was cinematically, performances, imagery, the use of multi-planning elements, creating depth, you know, before really in a computer age was really fantastic. Some things like that really impressed me. I certainly carried it in the Simpson episodes. I always loved to have a multi-plane effect of dimension when you move the camera.
As original anime features languished at the box office, television was about to experience an anime explosion.
MTV animation in the mid-90s was mostly about adult comedy.
Beavis and Butthead and The Simpsons really opened the door to a larger audience in America. Pokemon's success, it introduced Japanese anime into an enormous mass market.
This is Ash Ketchum. He's a Pokemon trainer. Pokemon trainer?
Pokemon, it seems to have kind of brought anime to the forefront, and people started kind of giving anime a different kind of respect.
When I was growing up, anime was really like a side thing that people were like, oh, that's nice. Because Pokemon has become more mainstream.
For this generation, Pokemon is their Mickey Mouse.
Pokemon's effect on American audiences transformed the television landscape.
It wasn't until, I think, Pokemon came out and had a couple years to really seep into the culture that it reached the adult phase where people in the mainstream started saying, well, wait a minute, we don't have to always use cut-out characters and crappy drawings.
That generation of kids became acquainted with that style of storytelling, and even though they left Pokemon behind, they wanted more.
Suddenly there was Adult Swim, and suddenly Dragon Ball, and suddenly all these things started to bloom around us.
Hollywood was still largely oblivious to anime's appeal until anime fans and filmmakers Larry and Andy Wachowski made Hollywood sit up and take notice with their futuristic blockbuster, The Matrix.
Movies like The Matrix were probably the first of the anime-influenced live-action movies.
The Matrix was basically an animatic of all the best anime out there. They basically turned all of that into a huge blockbuster.
Ghost in the Shell, the anime classic and an acknowledged inspiration for the Wachowski brothers, informed The Matrix with almost identical action sequences, special effects, and futuristic production design. For example, The Matrix borrowed the spirit of this sequence from Ghost in the Shell, putting the squeeze on actor Keanu Reeves.
Must be a loose wire.
High concepts such as plugging the human brain into a central computer or matrix was also borrowed from Ghost in the Shell.
Directors are influenced by what they've seen in the past and often apply that to their own films. It's only natural that movies made after Ghost in the Shell share similarities.
The Matrix blew the doors off of everything, I think. The idea that they sort of use the same kind of staging that you get in anime, and the idea of that visual sort of storytelling through action, and Matrix came in and just redefined that for everybody.
You go into it knowing you're not in there for photorealism. You just want a cool factor. You just want testosterone and a very graphic sense of fighting.
The Matrix borrows an action aesthetic from Japanese anime and transforms an industry. As the movies evolve, the anime audience continues to grow.
I think any kid right now who sketches a little cartoon character, maybe 20 years ago was sketching Snoopy. But now they're sketching Yu-Gi-Oh! Just because this comes out of their hand. You know, there's something that's so deeply in the culture now that, you know, people think in terms of anime already.
Fans have overwhelmed conventions nationwide.
There was a statistic I saw that said that there are 150 anime conventions in America every year. That's more than 2 a weekend.
Your anime fan now is anybody that you might see on the street. It's gotten so wide a range. Girls, young girls, older girls, women, men, any race. It's amazing.
When you see somebody walking around in a Naruto outfit or a Cowboy Bebop outfit, you get how connected they are.
Conventions weren't the only place fans could converge. The World Wide Web provided a global platform for everyone to share.
Before, anime fans were too split up geographically to be able to group together to support this art form. The internet allows that geographically neutral, shall we say, community so that everyone can group together and say, we like this.
In many ways, the rise of anime and manga in this country is an internet phenomenon. When the World Wide Web started happening in the early 90s, suddenly you start seeing more and more anime selling to the point where now it's entirely infused our popular culture.
Music, art, and fashion began to reflect the cultural influence anime was exerting with American artists.
The influence of anime is in the clothes that you see kids wearing and young adults. Gwen Stefani and a whole clothing line there, her Harajuku Girls, t-shirts and music.
When we did Breaking the Habit, I wanted to feel surreal and just different. You know, I became a fan of Nagasawa's work. This guy had drawings that looked like people, but then put them in full dynamic motion that looked very surreal and illustrative and fantastic at the same time.
When I released the album called Iron Man by one of my artists, Ghostface Killer, we used the Speed Racer animation for the video itself.
Just light up the mic, guard knives, the splat joints, the character points, Corolla, Motorola, play it guard, he pack over the shoulder.
The song was called Daytona 500, which is basically, you know, a race, and who has the most coolest races in Speed Racer. We didn't use no live footage, just took some of the Speed Racers episodes, chopped them up, and made a hip-hop video out of it.
It pays black, the Mac 10 flex, white cats like Windex, Index, finger be sore, busting these block spread, the Wally can't count crazily green.
As American artists embraced anime, Hollywood was observing, waiting to see if the anime influence was simply a short-lived trend.
Hollywood was flirting with Japan a lot, and they had been for a while, but nothing had really happened. And then Animatrix came and really changed, I think, a lot of opinions about what's possible for Japanese animation.
The Wachowski brothers went back to Japan and addressed Japanese animators and said, would you work on this? And the Japanese animators were like, yes, we love this.
Now the biggest Hollywood franchise of the day, The Matrix, had given a big stamp of approval to Japanese animation and put out a DVD that sold something like 3 million units worldwide, which no one understood.
Seduced by success, Hollywood finally begins to explore anime's potential.
So you have Afro Samurai, written by a Japanese manga artist, illustrated entirely by a Japanese anime artist, and really produced, in many respects, by a Japanese anime studio, with Samuel L. Jackson doing his own executive production and doing 2 of the voices.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think a teddy bear is supposed to be walking around the damn kimono strapped with blades. I got a bad feeling about this. You don't want to be messing with this guy, Afro. I'm telling you, man, that shit ain't natural. He might look cute and all, but I got a suspicion this one's a pro.
So American Hollywood actors doing the voices, soundtrack by the RZA from Wu-Tang Clan. That's a real Japan-American collaboration.
Man, all these killings are really starting to depress me.
I think one of the first words you're gonna get about Sam Jackson is cool, because he's a cool motherfucker. And so it gave Sam a chance to really kind of zone in and use that voice. Like, God damn, what the hell? You know, he really brought that soul into it, you know what I mean?
Whoa, what's up? Was it something in the lemonade? Oh, snap! You were jacked up, Holmes? Oh, no.
ちょうど僕が10代の頃に
When I was a teenager, I discovered American hip-hop and soul music. So I immersed myself in it. Afro Samurai was conceived by combining both Japanese samurai movies and American hip-hop culture.
The theme was to have different styles of music represent different characters. So Afro Father, who I felt was a cool 70s type of Sly Family Stone type of Shaft guy, and, you know, he first pulls his sword out, you hear this wah-wah that sounds like Isaac Hayes could have wrote it. When Justice comes and he does his strike and he kills the father, you hear this big rock and roll chorus coming in.
Finally, I've got the title of #1 in my hand.
And then you see Afro sitting there just looking, then you hear the spaghetti western vibe come in. It's this combination of music that hip-hop is.
Gino.
To me, that's really what Afro Samurai is all about. International creative collaboration. It's filled with all these mixes and matches of culture. The flirtation of Hollywood to Japan has now become a working relationship. So I think it's starting to really flow right now. And I think there's going to be a lot of successes and failures because of that flow.
I think anime is having a profound effect on Hollywood as we see it now, and it's going to have more as we go along.
It's blending with American style of storytelling, so it's becoming more and more difficult to distinguish, but it's certainly exciting, and it's visually dramatic and still kind of fresh for the audience, I think.
Hollywood is finally embracing everything anime has to offer.
Right now, I see there's a huge influence of Japanese animation into Hollywood live action. I think there's a real hunger for this kind of grit and mythology and just cool factor in our films.
This is a way for studios to feel safe, but at the same time, they really feel like they're sort of on the cutting edge of what's cool. They're really just big action movies, and action movies do incredibly well. The decision makers in Hollywood are starting to become people who grew up on this stuff and at least can champion at a studio to possibly a studio chief who wouldn't have grown up on it, but who trusts the people around them to sort of come up with a lot of these properties.
I think that we're in an interesting time in the filmmaking business right now because you have a lot of directors who are fan directors, very talented directors who come from the fan base that we're talking about right now. They love anime, they love manga, and they love comics in general.
I think you're going to see more and more anime in more and more places that you didn't see it before.
Manga and anime fan Quentin Tarantino recognized what Japanese anime directors had known all along. In its pure form, anime could fully articulate and express everything he wanted to do when the restrictions of live action intervened.
There wasn't a lot of CGI in Kill Bill. but yet there's a whole animation sequence because the ideas that he wrote in his script for the character could not actually be done without animating it. He was actually able to get away with potentially rated X material because it was animated.
I mean, it was actually emotionally involving, you know? I mean, it emotionally involved in a cartoon, that's doesn't happen all the time, you know? It really blew me away.
I think you're going to see more and more of that as we continue. And as it becomes more a part of American culture, not a Japanese flavor of an American product.
As Hollywood action-adventure filmmaking and entertainment becomes more realistic and therefore more challenging, Japanese anime is helping to reinvent the genre.
I think in Hollywood now, I feel two major trends in the combination of US and Japan collaborations. The first one is the adaptation into Japanese franchises into live-action movies.
Autobots, transform!
We have, of course, very recently Transformers and other movies about to break that are based on classic Japanese characters. So you have this great intellectual properties library in Japan with these wonderful characters and wonderful properties that are now going to be brought to live action.
I do see some anime-inspired Hollywood projects. More specifically, I see anime-inspired Hollywood people. Like James Cameron is a huge anime fan, you know, and I think he's doing Battle Angel Alita, and he talks about anime. Those people, they know anime. You know, they know the names, they know the characters, and you know, you go in their offices and there's 50 DVDs of anime stuff on the wall. So you know they know they're into it.
Over the past year or so, anytime someone's called me about any other job or anything, 90% of it's been because they've optioned a manga book or they've optioned an anime property that they want to have sort of adapted.
There's a lot of great anime titles that lend themselves to very interesting films.
You know, we start seeing things like the Astro Boy live-action movie, or a Dragon Ball live-action movie, or you know, a Gatchaman live-action movie, or a Speed Racer live-action movie, which I think is a very exciting kind of slow-burning, but may be the hugest bloom.
Here comes Speed Racer, he's a demon on wheels.
Speed Racer was a favorite childhood series of the Wachowski brothers. Their dream to bring anime's favorite racer to the big screen will be realized in 2008.
He's busy revving up the powerful
I went in and met with Larry and Andy, and they just pretty much blew me away with the way they talked about the picture and about what they were wanting to do with it.
They wanted to make a film for their nieces and their nephews, their friends, their families. They've made a lot of R-rated movies, and they've never really made films for everybody. And it was an opportunity to make something that was, you know, a big family movie, a big fresh idea, and to do something that they've always loved, Speed Racer. Having grown up on Hanna-Barbera, Fred Flintstone, and Yogi Bear, this was the first time they saw something that was really different.
Producer Joel Silver assembled the visual effects team from The Matrix Legacy to support the Wachowskis' vision. The all-star cast includes Emile Hirsch, Matthew Fox, Susan Sarandon, John Goodman, and Christina Ricci.
I'm really excited because I just feel like there's so many negative images for little girls out there, and she's a very strong-willed, smart girl who also, you know, is super cute and has great clothes. So I'm pretty into it.
I was known in my circle of friends as like the slowest driver, the grainy driver. You know, I sit and I'm like, do you guys have your seatbelts on? Because I'm not starting in the car if you don't have your seatbelts on. They'd be like, oh, and put them on. But once I got the part, I started driving like a little bit faster and a little bit faster. So by the time this comes out, I should be like Formula One in it.
The Mach 5 wins! I won the money. I won it.
With Speed Racer drawing close to completion, Hollywood is digging deeper.
There's so many really cool properties out there, like, you know, Cowboy Bebop would be an amazing movie. I would crawl over broken glass to do a Cowboy Bebop movie.
Sorry, but I'm just a bounty hunter.
I don't really give a damn what happens to the world. It's all the same to me. I just came here to pay back the favor I owe ya. You think it's just a threat, don't you? But I will do it. Go ahead.
Yeah, one movie I'd love to do is Robotech. To compare it to anything recently, there's Transformers, you know, where you have like special effects pushed all the way to the limit.
Adaptations of popular anime titles are a natural fit for Hollywood. However, collaborations between Japanese animators and Hollywood storytellers is creating a whole new genre.
Who the fuck are you? I'm looking for someone.
Highlander has always been a cult, underground, huge film. I mean, and it's an awesome concept. So when we were looking at anime properties, we wanted to find a U.S. franchise or a U.S. property that would lend itself to what anime brings, I think, through anime storytelling. And Highlander just seemed to really fit.
Witchblade, which was originally an American comic book, is now being done as a Japanese animated series. That pinging back and forth has been happening for many, many decades. It's just now happening so much faster because of communication, because the world is so much smaller.
We're actually the first American property to get the true original anime treatment for Witchblade.
Japan can do what they do best. Create all these new designs and these new stories and make it their own and own it. And create a full animation series that when you bring back into the US has the name Witchblade done in Japanese animation. Perfect storm.
With the success of the TV series again in Japan and it coming back to the US, absolutely we'd love to see Witchblade as a live-action feature, which is actually what we're pursuing, is a live-action feature film.
What started as Japanese comic books inspired by American animation has evolved into the inspiration for some of Hollywood's biggest films.
The pop culture phenomenon that is manga and anime is not going to go away. I think it's just going to grow. And I think as more and more people accept it, that industry is just going to keep increasing.
Holy shit! Where is he?
Anime to me has always been way up there, but my friends and just the culture around me and America was kind of changing. You cannot deny that. Anime has infiltrated our society.
That was off the chain! Cold-blooded! Damn, motherfucker!
You know, I'm excited because there's all these possibilities of great talent and great concepts and great franchises working together to make animation.
But it just shows you the power and the potential that animation in Hollywood and filmmaking is now finding this merge that's giving audiences the great thrill ride that they want when they pay the $10.
You don't even have a strategy, do you?
Just make a move.
Hollywood is realizing that these are great stories that are global. They translate really, really well because they're heroes' journey stories, which are the kind of stories that everyone understands.
Your body can't be as hard as rock all over, now can it?
Program end.
Program end.